I'd like to introduce Dr. Jack Odel to you, who will moderate the panel discussion. Dr. Odel is a Reynolds Distinguished Professor of Animal Science at North Carolina State University. He earned a BS degree at Purdue, and I understand he got all A's at Purdue, and an MS and PhD at Wisconsin, and I bet he got all A's at Wisconsin as well. He's had a very distinguished career in studying regulation of lipid metabolism, intestinal growth, and metabolism, and he's a specialist in neonatal nutrition. So Dr. Odel?
Yep. Very good. Thank you, Don. Okay, so as we're transitioning in our program here, I want you to appreciate what we have in mind, okay? So we kept these presentations arguably short. Wouldn't you say we're relatively short to what one would normally do, because we wanted to leave time for more of a discussion and a conversation, really. We used the word conversation last night, and we're gonna be moving in that direction, because after the panel Q&A, we're gonna transition into some roundtable interchange as well, okay? So I want you to relax and open up here, and feel free to query our distinguished panel. So if we have questions from the floor, please don't be shy. We are recording this, and so it would be helpful if you'd use the microphones that are in the room and bring your questions forward.
I'll start off a little bit. Since we have a couple of veterinarians, one of the things that I think has been a good model has been the One Health initiatives. One of the things that our coordinating committee has really thought about as we came forward to today's discussion was more about the concept of One Nutrition. So I would say, based off the One Health initiative, facilitating a conversation across agencies, what can we do across nutrition to better facilitate conversations across governmental agencies, across academia?
Anyone want to offer a comment?
Okay, that was a question brought up to me during the break, so if I sound repetitious to one person in the audience, I am sorry. One Health, it's a great idea. At our center in 2009, we were front center of responding to the pandemic H1N1 virus that was devastating to the swine industry overnight. They lost $1.4 billion in equity that year when 17 countries threatened to ban or did ban U.S. pork products exported to those countries. The U.S. at that time was exporting 20% of their pork. Today we're north of 23%. So we're vulnerable when those sort of things happen. June of 2009, Congress passed, the President signed the 2009 Pandemic Big Long Title response budget, $5.9 billion with a B dollars allocated to HHS. So be careful of what you wish for. At USDA, ARS, we cannot hire permanent employees off temporary funds. You will get what you wish for if you're not careful, because of that $5.9 billion, $2 million went to temporary research on H1N1 in animals. And at our center, we got less than half of that, and we were the ones doing all the work in pigs. So my view is One Health is a great concept, but it's a one-way street currently. If you're going to do One Nutrition in this town, you need to make sure that the money goes across the agencies and it becomes available to all of you. If it's going to go into ARS, you need the money. If it's going to go to the competitive grant programs, you all need the money. And I would argue it needs to be all of the above.
I think it's a great question, and being a veterinarian and a nutritionist, my thought, the reason, I have a lot of people say, well, you had a PhD in ruminant nutrition, why'd you go to veterinary school? And it was really there are many different ways to look at One Health. We tend to look at the human-animal environmental interaction, but I think that really the disciplines that fit within the One Health, instead of trying to change and go into a new category where it's one nutrition, I would look for ways for us as nutritionists to incorporate into the One Health concept that's already established. If I were going to be someone, and that would be just like what we talked about with, I mean, the best, actually you addressed the two veterinarians, probably the person that had the best example of one nutrition was sitting between us.
Yeah.
And understanding, I'm going to start going back and looking some of these pediatric papers and incorporating them into our nursery units and pig barns and things to that nature. But I think that's how we stimulate and cross-pollinate, and that's really although we put the term One Health on there for, I think, more for funding reasons, than we really have to focus on making sure that we're making the translation into the field and into our food supply and that.
So I think we tend to be in our own sort of silos. The animal nutrition folks tend to look more at animal science research, and the human nutrition people tend to look, and the medical people tend to look at the human studies. But we need to cross-pollinate, and I think there's a lot of research that's supported by the USDA, ARS, as well as this dual purpose for dual benefit program, where we're looking at how nutrition research can improve the health of both humans and animals. And I gave some examples about how nutrition research in, for example, neonatal pigs, which Jack also does, and Jack's done a lot of critical research in the area, targeting a lot to lipids and probiotics and so forth and so on. So I think there's many ways that research that's done in domestic animal species can improve human health, but we also need to look at a lot of the work that's done in humans and how can that improve animal health as well.
I'm going to offer a comment too, as with my privilege here, if you don't mind, just to say that I think that we're responsible for some of this divide ourselves. I mean, I've been resident on on 4 different land grant campuses that have colleges of agriculture in one form or another, and colleges of vet medicine, and varying degrees of divide between them, right? And our morning time has been focused on nutrition, which often lies on the ag side of things, right? And health, and those are importantly connected, and yet we programmatically, our campuses have this great divide that we need to work on. I think we suffer from those silos, so to speak. And I've really enjoyed your talks, because maybe some of that is going away. But I would also agree that our human capital is what scares me the most. The dwindling numbers of students, the bright minds, attracting them into our disciplines. That's a frightening prospect, I think. Projecting the dearth of young talent, and feeding the world that's a noble, grand challenge, a grand calling. It's worthy of our best minds.
Yes.
So hopefully forums like this and so forth, and these kinds of discussions can help bring some life to this area that's sorely needed. Okay, more questions. Come on, let's go. Questions for our speakers. We have lots of time. Yes.
Roger Cady from Malenco, and thank you all for your presentations. You stimulated a lot of thought process for me that may come out this afternoon as well. My question is directed at primarily Dr. Davies right now. You spoke about infant nutrition and nutrition of growing individuals. You spoke about hunger. You spoke about other aspects. The one thing I see that's missing is in our population growth, and I now don't have to present the 2050 scenario, but in that population growth, the fastest growing segment of the population is the centenarians, people over 100. And I'm a baby boomer myself. As I look around the room, there's a number of baby boomers in here. We're all expected to live now into our 80s. Who is and where is the study of nutrition of aging people coming into this? Because the need for protein for aging people is probably equal to that of about an infant in order to maintain their body mass.
Right, so there's a lot of studies being conducted right now looking at the importance, for example, of protein in the diet and exercise, actually, on the development of sarcopenia and so forth. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest that a higher intake of protein than what's currently recommended by the RDA might be appropriate to improve or reduce the risk, let's say, of sarcopenia, for example. So, there are different groups of thought out here, but my reading of the evidence as an editor of Journal of Nutrition and one who's been working in this area for many years would say, maybe the RDA for protein needs to be increased to in older people to prevent sarcopenia and muscle wasting. So, there's a lot of interest now, I think, because of the growth in the elderly population on what we can do with nutrition to improve health. So, Jack, do you want to contribute to that a little bit?
No, I think I would fully agree. I don't really have much to add. Yeah, I really completely agree.
Yeah, I think because we're here in the room kind of thinking more about animal production, we tend to think more in early life, and that's where my focus is,
Right.
and Jack's focus, for example. So, but absolutely, the nutrition in the elderly
Yeah, I think
is very critical.
Yeah, and NIH is certainly tuned to that. In our animal sector, again, the lifespan, it's greater, I guess, for our ruminant herds, and our reproducing females would probably, be the aged ones, right? It doesn't take long to get an animal to market, so we're on strictly the animal husbandry side. We're focused on
Growth.
on growth and relatively early in life, not geriatrics, not as much longevity type of thing. So it's.
I understand exactly your point, and I understand the focus here, but much of the demand for food is going to come from that older population and that demand for protein, which then feeds back into our animal systems being able to produce enough protein. Because
Right.
that demand is not just coming from more people, it's coming from that there's a few more infants, but there's going to be a lot more older people. And the other thing is the growth of the middle class. It's just not more people.
That's right.
It goes back to exactly what Dr. Thompson said,
Yes.
is that it's the poor and the rich who
Right.
don't need this. But what we have 1.8 billion middle class people in the world now. By 2050, we're expecting almost 4 billion. That's over a doubling. That's where the demand is going to come from. And much of those are going to be people in older parts of life. And so it's all about the demand that I'm talking about and recognizing that demand.
And I think this, the rise in the population, particularly in the developing countries, is driving a lot of this increased need for animal source foods, because there's going to be, by the year 2050, increased demand that's projected to be about double in the developing countries. And a lot of this is driven by the rise in the middle class and the improvement in the economies of places like China and India and Pakistan and so forth.
Please, Dr. Curl.
You triggered a thought in my head with your question. And clearly, the human side of this is very important. But it struck me as you raised the question about the centenarians, do we know how to feed our older animals? And I was on a sow farm last May that it was recovering from the PED virus epidemic that swept through their facility. And in that one facility, they, standard for the industry is very few parodies for an average for their sow population. Yet, it was incredibly skewed. They had from one parody, first parody gilts, to 17 parodies in the same barn getting the exact same ration. I would suggest to you that we might not be doing that quite right. And if we're going to sustain animal protein production, I think we need to know how to sustain the older animals, the older breeding herd on all livestock facilities. And because the dairy industry can barely get a replacement heifer with the turnover that they experience. So, and it's not a whole lot different in the swine industry. They just have larger litters.
Teaching clinical nutrition at a veterinary school, the area that we do have probably the most research on geriatric nutrition in animals is with our companion animals, and the dogs, cats, horses, but specifically dogs and cats. There's a lot of money that's being invested by private companies into geriatric pet foods and supplements, so maybe that would be maybe more of a better correlation of the human-animal model than with food animals.